So with the dice surface honed, polished, and waxed, I thought, wow, these things are incredible. These need some kind of custom box or something to hold them because just selling them individually is just unacceptable. So I played around with some test cuts and oak, trying to come up with some kind of cool little box that I could machine and include with them. And here I just kind of have an offset screen there. The top one is 100 inches per minute and the bottom was at 40 inches per minute. I originally started with 100 inches per minute just because cutting wood is like not taxing at all for the mill. But what I found out was that left kind of some tear out on the surface of the wood, which would require some further sanding in the future. So I thought, well, you know, I want to spend as little time sanding as possible because I really don't have very many woodworking tools at all. So I just slowed the feed rate down a bit. Anyway, so what gave me this idea was my wife had a jewelry box I was kind of inspecting and looking at, and it looked just like a solid piece of wood, but it had like this hidden lid that would kind of slide off, and I thought that was really cool. It's kind of like a puzzle box, and I thought, well, maybe I could do something like that. So when I was at Lowe's one day, I picked up a 14-degree dovetail router bit with a 1/4-inch shank. And I thought, well, okay, maybe I could try to get this to work. You know, I really don't know much about dovetail cutting or anything, but I'd give it a shot. So it turns out that this lid has a 14-degree dovetail, so that must be like a common woodworking dovetail bit. And in fact, I think it's made for like cabinetry and things. But it took me a few attempts to get the kind of tolerances right between the lid and the box to where they kind of slid back and forth easily without being too tight. But I eventually got it, and it works great. So back to what you're viewing here, what I'm doing is trying to relieve the corners of the squares that I had originally cut out with a 3/8-inch end mill, and because they're going to leave quite rounded corners, and the individual dies won't fit in there. So what I'm doing here with an 1/8-inch end mill is just kind of relieving those corners to give some clearance. And then after it kind of drills these little holes, if you will, they're not quite holes. And the reason I'm doing a drilling operation is because they're not completely encapsulated by the wood. So I didn't want any kind of deflection going on there, to where maybe the die would wedge in at the bottom and be loose at the top. Probably not an issue in wood, but you know, I'm always thinking in terms of machining metal. But anyway, this worked out quite well, albeit a little slow. So what I do is I relieve those corners, and then that still leaves some material that is left behind by the 3/8-inch end mill. So what I do is I just do a full profile pass around the inner diameter, or the inner surface of that square, and it'll make sure it's a square just with a little bit of relief at the corners. And this worked out really well. I had to play with that too in just a scrap piece of oak. I kept having to increase the diameter and increase, or not the diameter, I'm sorry, increase the internal dimensions of that square pocket until the dice would kind of easily fit down in there, because it was just way too tight. Each time I increased the dimension, it was just tight, but it was getting looser and looser, and eventually it was loose enough where they would just slide down in there easily. So that ended up working good. So after a few attempts just with the scrap piece of wood, I realized, what if these things get stuck in there for whatever reason? Maybe there's lint or, dust, or who knows. Say they get stuck in there. Maybe this wood swells or something. How are you going to get them out of there? So I thought, well, it might be a good idea to include some kind of finger grooves. So I'm using a 1/4 inch ball mill right here to just mill some finger grooves, just in case for whatever reason they get kind of too snug in there to just fall out. You can turn it over, you can tap it against something, and then at least you'll have some relief to get some purchase around it to grab it. Even if you have to grab them with, something like pliers with electrical tape taped around the inner surfaces of it. But I've tried this a few times, and even if they are stuck, tapping them and then in combination with those finger grooves should give you enough purchase to pull them on out of there. Cutting wood with a mill with only a 5,000 RPM spindle is kind of interesting because you can go a lot faster than you think you can, and the mill handles it just fine. It's just a matter of the surface finish of the wood. I notice if you start going too fast, it kind of leaves a rough surface on the wood and some tear out and things that you have to go back and sand. So I have a tendency to just kind of keep it slow. So here's that 14-degree dovetail cutter. And this took quite a few attempts and scraps to get the tolerances and dimensions just right to where the lid will slide easily but snug. You don't want it too loose. You don't want the thing falling out, but you don't want to have to sit there and fight with it to open it. So it just kind of snugly fits in there, and here I am machining the lid portion. And this is sort of a jury rig setup here, but it works fine. I just had a piece of aluminum square bar I picked up at a scrapyard to kind of clamp it down with strap clamps on either side. It looks like a very precarious clamping situation here, but it's quite solid. So what I'm doing is clamping that piece against the fixed vice jaw, so I have some clearance beneath that piece of wood, so I don't, mill up my jaw or mill up the vice, which would obviously be bad. So then I can just loosen those strap clamps and pull that piece right out. So what I'm doing here is just an initial test box, just to make sure, I have a proof of concept. So turns out it works just fine. It's still a little bit snug, and I ended up adjusting the clearance a little bit more, the tolerance of the lid a little bit more, because it is quite snug there, but it slides freely with some amount of effort. It doesn't bind or anything like that. So I don't have really any woodworking tools, so here I am using my metal cutting bandsaw to cut wood, which ended up working surprisingly well. It cuts very quickly. It leaves a decent surface finish, not the best, but not terrible. But this ended up being a pretty economical operation here. I was able to use the stop that comes with the saw to just saw up a whole bunch of blanks out of a big piece of oak that I had. And even though this is 5x, it still cut through that wood quite quickly. And this is on the fastest belt speed. Even though that is a metal cutting saw and a metal cutting blade, it just chops through that stuff easily. So I put a 1, 2, 3 block there as sort of a stop. And what I'm doing is cutting those blanks into 2 separate box blanks. So each blank that I cut off of that oak, that large oak piece, will become 2 boxes. I just have to cut them to the right width here. So there's 2 cuts involved doing that, because cutting that block that I cut off the main oak is just leaves too thick of a block, so I have to cut a little bit off. Here I'm cutting them the actual dimensions of the box, like the width and length, and not really the thickness. And here are all the blanks stacked up there. So after I got a proof of concept down, I decided to go ahead and start milling a whole bunch of lids since I got that sort of worked out, the tolerances worked out. And here's sort of a fast forward scene of how I do that. I just kind of set a 1, 2, 3 block up against the movable vice jaw, which is locked in position. And then I run the pass that way. I've indicated off of the faces of the 1, 2, 3 block. And then as you can see, it just slides right in there into the box. Works out quite well. Everything fits just fine. So I decided to ramp up operation and do 3 at a time because basically that's all I can hold in my vise. Actually, I have 2 vices, but I haven't broken the other one out yet. So after I indicate off the surface, I kind of made a few modifications to the code to just expand the number of instances across 3 parts instead of just 1, which is a very simple thing to do. So each operation it just kind of does in triplicate based on some amount of spacing that you specify. And the spacing I used was just the width of those pieces of wood. I felt it necessary to go through all of this effort to make the boxes because I don't think anyone else does that. I'm not even sure of anyone else that makes a custom wooden box to hold dice like this. But I thought the caliber of these dice warranted it. And again, we do just a full profile operation with that 1/8" end mill just to clean up anything and make sure that the individual dies will fit down in there freely without any kind of binding or, you know, getting wedged in there or something. Some of them may fit a little snug, but I haven't tested them all quite yet. But even if they do fit a little snug at the bottom, just from, you know, burrs or whatever in the wood, should still be fine. Even the ones that are like that, you can easily turn the box upside down and just sort of tap them out. But I decided to have the pockets separated by a wooden divider there, so the dice aren't constantly rubbing up against each other and things when they're in the box. Because the storage box is not only a stylish way to carry them and transport them and things like that. It's also a way to protect them. And if they are, and there you see the lid going on. And there's a whole bunch of them that I milled and getting ready for the next operations. But if you have them in constant contact with each other, I think that would not be as good as if you could have them physically separated. So here I am. The standard size wood that you can get from the hardware store or whatever is too thick for what I wanted. So basically, I put the lids in. I put some parallels in there to the height such that the lids will not shift out while you're cutting them. And then I just kind of mill everything down to the same height. So at this point, it looks exactly just like a block of wood. It's indistinguishable from just a block of wood because that dovetail fits so perfectly. But if you slide the lid open, suddenly it reveals the dice inside. I didn't film the part prior to this, but I actually ran these on a router, and I don't have a router table yet. So I kind of just clamped the router in between my knees and ran it across it that way to round over the edges. It's probably a good thing I didn't post it because I'd get a bunch of safety Nazis telling me how I'm going to chop my fingers off or something. And they're probably right. But I kind of needed to do it this way with the tools I had available. So in the future, I'll definitely get a router table. But here they all are, all rounded over, and I actually bought that belt sounder you saw a minute ago just to aid in the sanding process because my hands and arms and back and everything was just cramping up. And then I test fit all the lids and make sure they fit just right, you know, a little snug but not too tight. I do amount of some sanding on them. And then I hit them with some stain to kind of give them a darker look. And then I hit them with some polyurethane. And then again, I would kind of test fit the lids and get them to fit just right. And here they are. They look just like solid pieces of wood with rounded edges on top. So here we are with a parting shot of batch 1 in its entirety and a pair of dice and a finished box. What I haven't shown a picture of is the velvet dice bag that will be included. I also recorded each dimension of each individual die and made a spec sheet that comes with each pair when you buy one. So that concludes the Precision Dice series. Feel free to subscribe and stay tuned for future projects. Thank you.